When it comes to horror games, the name Shinji Mikami reigns supreme, and with good reason, having been the man behind both Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4, two of the franchise's most iconic entries. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, he took his winning formula and blended it with Jurassic Park. Unfortunately, where Resident Evil managed to successfully distance itself from its Night of the Living Dead source material, Dino Crisis failed to do the same because it was such an unabashed ripoff of Spielberg's classic, to the point that despite God knows how many dinosaurs they might have been able to take inspiration from, the core enemies of the game were just an army of raptors, as well, of course, as a tenacious T-Rex that turns up at inopportune moments for dramatic flair. Don't get me wrong, the T-Rex is awesome, but it's definitely not original. I mean, it even sounds the same. There was also the odd Pteranodon, a couple of times where you meet some Compsognathus, as well as the Therizinosaurus. Nailed it. And apparently a planned edition of a Triceratops that was unfortunately scrapped. A like, or better yet a subscribe, is literally the currency that allows YouTube to pay me, so a little click from you is a massive win for me. Thank you so much. Now, I'm certainly not trying to bash the game. Capcom simply wasn't the powerhouse with an army of researchers that it is today, and no doubt Mikami and his team worked within their means to create what critics received as a very fun game. I'm simply outlining what I think impacted its ability to stand apart from other survival horror titles, which would of course allowed it to better stand the test of time.
Rick can handle the inside of the facility on his own.
Critics praised it for altering the Resident Evil formula, and also for bringing to light the subgenre which Mikami called panic horror, which relied on shock moments to raise pulses, mixed into good old-fashioned action to keep the pace flowing, a method that he went on to absolutely nail in Resident Evil 4. This is achieved a number of different ways, the most obvious being that the playable character of Regina is armed with sensible weaponry from the outset that allows her to fight her opponents when necessary. Weaving is still by far your best bet when playing the long game, but ultimately ammo conservation and hoarding of medipacks simply wasn't as vital as it was with Resident Evil. The second was that Mikami was very particular that Dino Crisis looked as good as possible in order to get the most out of the game's scares. Where Resident Evil 2 really pushed the PlayStation to its limits, Dino Crisis created a whole new engine to help things look as realistic as possible, with the Tyrannosaurus model being made up of a whopping 500 polygons, which was amazing for the time, in order to make these scenes as impactful and ultimately as terrifying as they could. Despite looking to the manga Cyber Blue as well as the movie Aliens to try and bolster the characters' personalities and banter, the dialogue is everything you might expect from a pre-millennium Capcom game, and frankly is better for it.
Gale!
Yeah.
I mean, what else do you say when you turn up to investigate a science complex and a friggin' Tyrannosaurus Rex smashes through the window and tries to eat you?
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
Exactly what I would say. The action was thrilling, the dino encounters were intense, the story was pretty serviceable, the lead character and her crew were likeable, and the experience was absolutely unique and a must-have purchase for PlayStation owners at the time.
End of the line for you, handsome. You're extinct!
Its sequel, released the following year, moved further from horror and into action, but despite this, they did such a good job of maintaining intensity during dino encounters that even hardcore survival horror fanatics accepted that it was still scary enough to keep everybody on edge. Many actually consider it to be a prototype for Resident Evil 4, with more emphasis on powerful firearms, the knife attack getting its own button, and the ability to spend collectibles from fallen enemies on what effectively amounted to a computerized merchant, some time before the actual iconic merchant first made an appearance. And as a result, it actually reached a wider audience and sold even better. The character story arcs were oddly rounded off with an on-rails shooter a couple of years after that, and that was about as well received as an H-bomb. and the final entry to the series was shifted to the Xbox and, more importantly, was set in space so as to distance itself from 9/11. How, you ask? Well, apparently the initial development had been based in a post-apocalyptic city after dinosaurs took over the Earth, which probably would have gone down about as well as Jurassic Park Dominion. And so to distance themselves from the controversy, they moved it 100 miles upward. Now full-fledged action with sci-fi jump boots, and actually relatively fun to play. Well, it was in friggin' space, so yeah, it lost pretty much everything that made it what it was. Except for the dinosaurs. Except they weren't dinosaurs, they were like clones with no skin or something, it doesn't matter. Capcom couldn't help themselves, it got weird, and that was the end of Dino Crisis.